All right, good morning, ICE family. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am Megan Daly. I help out with the fitness athlete course, the extremity courses, and the spine division. So, super pumped to come to you for Fitness Athlete Friday, best day of the week. And first off, the Fitness Athlete Live courses, we have so much coming up. I'm only going to go through a few of them. Definitely check out the website for upcoming courses. We've got February 4th in Florida. We've got the February 11th in Stillwater, Minnesota, I believe. And then March 4th in Amarillo, Texas. And so many more coming up. I mean, I know there's ones booked out to September, so definitely check those out. And then, especially with it being Fitness Athlete Friday, I can't start off without congratulating Kelly Binfi on her podium placement at Wadapalooza. So congrats on that. All right, so today we are talking about lifting with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. This is a patient population that honestly has a lot of fear and nocebo instilled in them by a lot of providers. Heck, if you just start Googling Ehlers-Danlos and lifting, the stuff that comes up on eds.com talks about Pilates, Tai Chi, and really their idea of a shoulder exercise is supine or prone shoulder flexion. And no hate on Pilates or Tai Chi, those actually are phenomenal for these patient populations, but the ones who want to get into lifting, there really isn't a whole lot for them out there. So that's what I wanted to talk about, because they absolutely can. There are high level lifters with EDS. It doesn't need to be a death sentence as far as a lifting career for them. And for that matter, I would argue that this patient population needs it the most. So if we think about our typical EDS patient, they've got decreased tendon stiffness, they have a lot of joint instability, they often have chronic pain, they have poor muscle recruitment, they tend to, I'm not gonna put a gross statement on them, but they tend to have more weakness. And with the idea, and we see this in general population too, a lot of times if they're having weakness and chronic pain, they become less active, and so it becomes this cycle of weakness and instability, which is not good for them. I mean, we know that. So this is a patient population that needs lifting. We know lifting is going to give them increased joint stiffness, increased tendon stiffness, or not joint stiffness, joint stability and tendon stiffness. And yet they have most providers telling them that they can't do this stuff, or that they're going to dislocate, or maybe they've even had multiple dislocations, and so there's a lot of fear, and so that just compiles when providers say nocibic type words like this. So let's dive into the research a little bit, and then I want to dive into some of my favorite exercises for this patient population. So there isn't a whole lot of research. Probably there are three really good ones that I found. One is researchers at Belgian University of Ghent found over 8 years. So they looked at EDS in normal population over 8 years and just kind of followed them normally, didn't change anything. It wasn't like they had a research study designed. They just followed them and looked at their activity and how they did. And what they found was that over those 8 years, people with EDS tended to lose more muscle endurance and muscle density than your average non-EDS person. And with the theory of, again, the weakness and pain causing more inactivity, and then they already have less, or a kind of skewed muscle of recruitment to begin with, and so it just created the cycle that I just talked about. And then Moeller et al. In 2014 looked at functional adaptation of tendon and skeletal muscle to resistance training in 3 patients. So admittedly, this is a really small study, but it's one of the best ones that I found as far as study setup. So what they found, it was 3 days a week for 4 months, and with loads, kind of like your normal training program, increased as they got stronger. And what they found was tendon stiffness by the end of the 4 months, tendon stiffness increased by 40%. I mean, that's staggeringly positive results for someone who is worried about instability, to have a 40% increase in tendon stiffness. Leg extension force increased by 8%, and then the power output of that muscle increased by 11%, which is, again, huge. Their 5-rep max leg press, and then they just said upper body press, so I don't really know overhead press versus bench press. But either way, both of those increased by 30%, which that's a giant PR. Those of us that lift, a 30% increase would be amazing. Their balance testing, sway decreased 26% with balance testing, and then they had a self-reported fatigue improvement of 21.4%. So that's huge. That's even getting into like, not only does it help with the physical adaptations, effects of EDS, but it also helps with fatigue and energy, which we know is just going to then help them become more active and stronger. So then the other good study that I found, well, study protocol, but it's based off of a smaller study. So there in 2020, there was an RCT protocol that was written up by Liggett et al. Based on results that they saw with a 12 patient one. So we all know what happened in 2020. I have no idea when this study, like if it's actually going to come to fruition, but there was a protocol produced for it based on the results of a smaller group using 12 people. And it was looking at not only EDS, but actually hypermobility spectrum disorder, which is essentially like adjacent to EDS. You have to have a Baton score of at least 5. You have to have some muscle pain, a lot of the musculoskeletal symptoms of EDS, but you don't quite fit the overall diagnosis for it. So it's kind of that like, we're not sure in between diagnosis. So they looked at both patient populations with this and divided these people into heavy or light. Now with that, I'm going to put strong quotation marks around heavy, because their light was basically your standard shoulder. This was specific to shoulder, by the way, this study. The light was basically your standard like yellow TheraBand exercises, like really not enough to challenge people. Now their heavy, I would also argue wasn't enough. It was just heavier, was probably a better term for it. So we're talking like light dumbbell, shoulder scaption, prone tees, prone ER, sideline ER, and then supine scap protraction was what they defined as the heavy group. So take it with a grain of salt. And in this trial, even the heavier destroyed the light. They had increased stability they used the Western Ontario Stability Index. They had increased strength and proprioception, like significantly, and then a subjective improvement in fatigue, quality of life, and function. So I know that was like a quick overview of the research that's out there for this. Please DM me. I'll have myself tagged on Instagram, so Move on the Daily, if you want to get access, you want links to these articles or more information on them. But overall, the idea is like strength training is going to be the best way to improve joint strength and joint control. We know that for general population. That also applies to this population. Like there are a few things that we need to consider or just when we are starting them off on a lifting program. But overall, it is imperative that this group get into lifting and just get stronger and get some more joint stability. So we need to have these talks with them. We need to let them know that it is safe and it is okay, and then help them figure out a way where they feel good and they aren't apprehensive about lifting. All right, so in general, the 3 concepts that I like to incorporate with a strengthening program for someone with EDS, I'm going to go through these and then I'll give some exercise examples. So I like to start with closed kinetic chain. There's a couple reasons for this. The patient feels way more stable. There's a lot less fear on board if you're starting with a closed kinetic chain because they can feel more. So with EDS, proprioception is often a little bit off. It's lacking. So doing a closed kinetic chain creates a little bit more proprioception. They feel a lot more stable versus like carrying a weight overhead or something open chain. This is actually a population. Sometimes I will bust the BOSU out even with a closed kinetic chain exercise, and maybe have them do, like, I call them bus drivers. I think that's what they're called, like where you do a plank on a BOSU and rotate it. You can see me kind of demo that if you are watching this versus listening. It's one of the populations that I might actually bust the BOSU out because I can get some instability in there, but they still feel very safe, and it lets them see. It's a good way for them to see that, like, oh, I can do something that is unstable. So closed kinetic chain is what I start with. Again, a lot of that is to increase proprioception, increase the feedback that they're getting, and make them a lot less fearful of the movements. The second part, tempo work. So I already kind of mentioned that muscle recruitment is a little bit off with this population. Tempo work is huge to allow and almost force their muscles to actually work through the full range, especially holding it at end range. So doing pauses. So this is where I'll use cyclist squat as an example, because a lot of times there's some patellar tendon pain in these patients. So doing a cyclist squat where you're on a slant board and holding maybe a goblet, maybe just like a kettlebell at the chest to start with, and doing like a 5-second count down, 2-3 second hold at the bottom, like 3 or 5 second count up, like whatever tempo works for however you're wanting to dose it, but have it nice, like be slow and controlled the entire time, and have them pause at the bottom, have them pause at end range where they're in a full depth squat before slowly coming out of it. Then more bodybuilding style accessory work. So, and don't worry, I'm going to go back through and give a couple more examples. Bodybuilding style accessory work is great for this patient population. This will vary a little bit depending on the person in front of you, because when you want to really incorporate this is when they have a specific joint that tends to flare up. Most EDS patients are going to have a joint or two that they just know is a little bit more sensitive, that tends to flare up. Maybe it's the elbow, maybe it's the knee, maybe it's the shoulder, but they're gonna have a joint that tends to be a little bit more quote unquote like problematic for them. So that's where maybe you build in some bodybuilding style accessory work so that they can mitigate that a little bit more readily on their own. So I'm going to go ahead and go through this one, since it is a little bit more, that's going to be more specific to the person in front of you and what joint is more problematic. So say it's someone whose elbow constantly flares up. Maybe you're giving them bicep curls. Maybe it's even tempo bicep curls to do as part of their program to try to offset or mitigate any elbow flare up that they have with lifting. Maybe it's even part of their warm-up. Maybe if it's, there's one person that comes to mind for me, constant shoulder flare-ups. So I would have her do lateral raises and lat pulls and really like a bodybuilding style. Like she had one day a week that was purely like a bodybuilding upper day to try to mitigate the shoulder issues that she was having. So then let's kind of go back through. So favorite, I'm gonna kind of circle it around the shoulder just because that tends to be a problematic joint for this population. So again, bodybuilding style accessory work, maybe we're doing lateral raises, maybe we're doing bent over flies, and lat pulls. Those tend to be, like if I were to think of the 3 bodybuilding style things that I pull in pretty regularly for this population, that would be it. Then for that tempo work, I really love doing tempo pull-ups and tempo push-ups for this population. So with pauses. So for example, with a pull-up, and if they don't have a full pull-up yet, totally fine. We're doing toe assisted where they have a box underneath them. This is something that we go over in the CMFA course a ton, both the live and the online, as a great scale option for this population. Like I don't want to give a band to an EDS patient. They don't need more momentum. I need muscle control. So I'm going to give them a box underneath where they can have one or both feet on and use their legs as much as needed, as little as possible, and have them do tempo pull-ups where they are doing like a 2-second up, 2 to 3 second hold at the top with the chin over the bar, nice slow down, and then not losing that control at the bottom and doing a hold there to demonstrate control in that position. That's a really, really great example of a way to use this with EDS patients, or even honestly your general population. But like I said, this EDS population needs a lot of joint stability. Tempo push-ups are the other one. Same thing here. Right before chest hits the deck, have them pause, have them go slow up, have them do an isometric hold at the top. And then now I'm kind of going backwards with the closed kinetic chain. Something that I love just starting this patient population with is plank toe taps. So this is a really great rotator cuff exercise. And they're going to be in a plank position, have the feet a little bit wider than normal. And you're going to punch through the floor, like so you're going to activate serratus. And then you're going to reach one hand towards the opposite foot. So the other arm is going into like a down dog position. And maybe I have them hold it in range there and do this nice and slow and controlled throughout the entire motion. Do that multiple times on both sides. That's a really great way to get them started with activating their rotator cuff. Oh, I skipped one. Tempo work, my other favorite one. So tempo pull-ups, tempo push-ups, and then the sideline rotator cuff trio. This is something, if you've been to our extremity course, we make you do it in real time and it fries people. So that one, it's going to be your sideline, you have a weight and you do it to a metronome going up into flexion, up into abduction, and then up into horizontal abduction. So that one, come to Extremity, check it out, or shoot me a message and I can send you a video that I have on my YouTube that goes through it so you can see it a little bit more visual. I understand that going through that really fast is a little tough to understand. But those are, so tempo pull-ups, tempo push-ups, sideline rotator trio, closed kinetic chain, the plank toe taps, and then side planks. It's a really great way to get control through. And then I progress those to banded pull-throughs. So you're on the side plank on your elbow or your hand, and then you reach and you have a band behind you and you're pulling it through. So like bow and arrow, I think is the name of the exercise. Sorry, completely blanked on that. That's a really great one for this patient population when you're starting out. So remember, I'm kind of going backwards. You want to start with closed kinetic chain, and then you can use it as accessory work, but you want to get them to all the major lifts. Box around the worlds is another good one. So think like if their knees or feet are on a box and their hands are on the ground inverted, and then they can walk their hands slowly where they kind of move around the box and then come back. So that's another great one to start getting some joint compression and some strength in there to start someone out, especially if there's also a fear of inversion. And then, so we're going to round out with my favorite exercise for this patient population, or really anyone with shoulder instability. But again, like you have to consider anything that you would do for someone with a slightly unstable shoulder, you do the same for EDS. You just maybe ease them into it a little bit more, because we only want to challenge them as much as, like, we don't want to put weight overhead that they can't control. So same concept as you would with anyone with instability, is give them something that's challenging but still doable. They should be able to still kind of control the weight. So my absolute favorite one is a bamboo carry, or a chaos carry if you don't have a bamboo bar. So if you've seen the bamboo bars, they're like a barbell, but it's out of bamboo, so it's super light, and then you can hang bands with weights attached onto it. Chaos carry, basically the same thing, you're just using a training bar. So it's now a 15-pound bar. You want to stay really light with that still, because the challenge comes from the weight that's hanging from the bar. And then you can do all kinds of things with that, but I'm generally just going to start with holds or carries, where, so they now have a bar with weights hanging from it, so it's super unstable, and I'm going to have them slowly press up and then just hold in that end range position. So this is kind of mixing that tempo work with some kinetic chain work. And you can progress that to carries. You can have it be a strict press where it's a tempo strict press. You can, anything. World's the oyster at that point. Like, you can get really creative with it. But that's a really, really good one, and it's probably the biggest bang for your buck. Once they are able to control that position enough for you to incorporate that exercise, it is a game changer for this patient population, and their control in their shoulder, their trust in their shoulder. And then, like I said, overall strengthening for this patient population is going to help improve fatigue, quality of life, all these other symptoms that they're constantly dealing with. So, please reach out if you have any other questions, if you want to dive into this anymore. Really, really great population to work with. They do need to lift. So I'm going to kind of circle back to a lot of EDS patients have had a lot of fear put in them. Please, whatever you do, like, just start to kind of chip away at that nocebo that's been put in them, and start to show them that lifting is safe through the closed kinetic chain, the tempo work, and then bodybuilding accessory work, so they can mitigate joint flare-ups on their own. All right, hope this was helpful. Have a great rest of your Friday, and we will see you on Monday.